Hello, this is Digressions. I'm Justin, and it's been at least a couple days, maybe more, since I've posted. I need to get back into this habit. I'm going to try not to beat myself up about it. I'm still trying to establish a habit. I guess today I'm going to talk a bit about books. Over the last few days, I've mostly been organizing digital copies of books and articles, things like that. And I'm just going to talk about three things with books. One is the two books that I'm currently reading, then the next book I plan on reading, and then 10 books that are probably my favorites. And I'm thinking that I might start just rereading those 10, see where they take me. So what I'm currently reading is Graham Greene's The End of the Affair. And it's the second Graham Greene book that I'm reading. And I find him really enjoyable. He's angry and he's funny. And the first book was The Quiet American, and the joke is for foreigners. In this book, the only quiet American is a dead American. And he writes with a lot of style, and his anger and bitterness is strangely endearing. The other book I'm reading is a Phaedon collection of Richard Prince, another person who is not really a nice person. And the notion that as artists or as creators we have to be nice is a very limiting kind of thing. Richard Prince really set a lot of interesting things in motion in terms of appropriation, but his work is about more than appropriation. To me, it's also about personas and about lies and truth and their relationship with image. I think he's actually a really good writer, and his interviews kind of play that out too. You track enough of it and you see that he does lie a lot, but that seems to be kind of trying to turn his biography and criticism about him into part of his art, which I think is like not a bad idea. So after I finish those two books, the big old book that I want to try reading for the first time, not just an excerpt, I think I've probably read an excerpt or two, is Don Quixote. And I really want to read that because I keep thinking about the importance of hallucinations and how we take it for granted that we are seeing things as they actually are. But I think that we actually see a lot of hallucinations. If you've ever had to teach a drawing class that connects with rendering and observational drawing, you realize that most people, when they start drawing, instead of drawing what they see, they're drawing what they think a drawing is supposed to look like. And usually that's a disaster. And I think that that's not an isolated phenomenon. I think that there's a lot of conditioning that we might want to uncondition. Now, on to a stack here of 10 of my favorite books, things that I think are essential and that I reread quite a bit. I'm going to start with the Tao Te Ching. This is a little pocket copy, and it is a version that is translated by Stephen Mitchell. If there's one religious book that I come back to again and again, it's this. It's useful for when you're sad, when you're happy, when you're just kind of wondering what to do. In particular, its notions on emptiness and fluidity are really essential to how I try to think about life. The next book was also translated by Stephen Mitchell, and that is Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. I find it endlessly moving, and I have come back to it quite a few times. I've also taught it a few times. The next book is a book called I Remember by Joe Brainerd, and it is a poem form in which every part of it is just one short memory. I remember such and such. I remember this. I remember that. I remember. And he just goes on with each thing that he remembers. And to some extent, it is a book of poetry. To some extent, it's a memoir. To some extent, it is about being gay at a certain point in history. And I think that the best way to read it is a kind of prayer. I don't know exactly why I say that, but I'll stand by that. The next book is my favorite book by Marshall McLuhan. He did it in collaboration with a designer named Quentin Fiore, and it is in a way about as much about design as it is about the text, and I think it's one of his most accessible books. And for a book that is accessible, I'm surprised at how it doesn't water down so much, at least for my tastes. So far, these books have been pretty thin. Next one is too. That one is Program or Be Programmed by Douglas Rushkoff, and it's my favorite book by Douglas. I'm a big fan of his podcast, Team Human, and I probably have gotten every book he's published outside of, I think, a few graphic novels that he's written. The next book, this is a little thicker. This is Close to the Knives by David Wojnarowicz. David was an artist, and he died quite young of AIDS. And it is a memoir, and it is something that I think I've seen described as a post-beat book. And reading his stories really changed my views on understanding people's lives, that we take for granted our own experience. And I don't know exactly what more to say about it, but I wouldn't mind rereading it. I'm thinking when I'm done reading Don Quixote, I probably will reread each of these books and probably do a more in-depth review. Not that I'm going to turn this channel just into booktube, but we'll just see what happens. Next one is Testo Junkie by Paul B. Precchiato. It is the wildest book of theory I've ever written. The subtitle is Sex, Drugs, and Biopolitics in the Pharmaco-Pornographic Era. And talk about challenging my views on experience. It also opens me up in terms of identity and possibility and self-experimentation. A lot of these books that I like, they're not for everyone, but I totally recommend them to anyone who's curious. The next one, also a book of queer theory, Times Square Red, Times Square Blue by Samuel Delany. The book is divided into two sides, or two parts. The first part is a long memoir of cruising around Times Square for several decades of his life. And I would just describe it as kind of very Walt Whitman-esque in terms of embracing humans in general, and in particular, lumpen humans, the lumpen proletariat, I think, as Marx would call them. The second half is even more important to me, and that is a more theoretical half talking about the difference between connection and networking. And I think that that's an idea that I probably think about every day. And I certainly look forward to talking more about that later. The next book is from one of my favorite series. This one is edited by Edward Schenken, and it is a great collection of articles and essays about systems theory. It goes a bit into cybernetics. Good stuff. Next thing, Word Virus. It's a collection by William S. Burroughs, or it's the William S. Burroughs Reader. A lot of Burroughs is really a challenging read. Talk about a book that's not for everyone, but Burroughs has had a huge impact on a lot of my favorite heroes and heroines, in particular Patti Smith and Laurie Anderson. The book has my favorite short bit of writing by him called The Discipline of D.E., and it samples this period of his writing called the cut-ups, which is really important to me and has been important to lots of people like David Bowie. Now, the next two books and the last of these are, so this is 12 books. I might have said 10 earlier. But the next book is Processing, a Programming Handbook for Visual Designers and Artists. And I have so many books on processing, and I wouldn't start most people out with this. There's actually a book called Getting Started with Processing that I'd recommend first. But I have a strangely sentimental connection with this. I remember a friend in Richmond, Miriam, who loaned me a copy of the first edition of this book. This is the second edition. And she said, when I saw this book, I thought of you. And it took a long time for it to grow on me, but now processing is very connected to what I do and what I hold to be my identity. Final book, and I don't know if I've actually read absolutely everything in here, but I've read most of it. I remember being in a group called the Brown Bag Banter, and at the beginning of that group, on the recommendation of Gardner Campbell, we started by reading excerpts from this book. This book has cued me into so much along the lines of early computer science history, but it also covers very experimental practices. Bits of literature are in here, and it's a keeper. So that's about it for books, and I'm not sure what I'll talk about tomorrow, but that could give you a little to chew on. If you have any book recommendations for me, please leave a comment. Leave a comment anyway, even if you don't have that, or if you're curious about any of those books. And please like, please subscribe, and pass this on. See you tomorrow.